She was told to use the service elevator. She was told to keep her eyes down, her voice low, and her opinions to herself, because in that ballroom, on that night, she was nobody. Just another woman in a black uniform carrying a silver tray through a room full of people who would never remember her face. 20 minutes later, every single one of them would know her name, and none of them would ever forget it. This is the story of Claire Bennett, a woman who walked into her own five-star hotel disguised as staff, and walked out having reminded an entire room what it means to be humbled. What happened between those 20 minutes changed lives, ended reputations, and revealed a truth nobody in that ballroom was prepared for. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire Bennett built the Kensington Grand from nothing, and yet on the night of its most important gala in a decade, she stood among her own guests as a stranger, unseen and unbothered, exactly the way she wanted it. Nobody in that room knew that the woman refilling their champagne glasses had signed every check that paid for the marble beneath their feet. Nobody knew that the quiet woman near the kitchen doors had once slept in the back office of a failing motel her mother could barely keep open. And nobody, not one soul in that glittering crowd, could have imagined that before the night was over, they would be looking at her differently, some with shame, some with fear, and one woman in particular with a horror she would never be able to explain away. That woman was Diana Sinclair, a name that meant old money, generational influence, and a family who had never once been told no. Diana had arrived at the gala the way she arrived everywhere, expecting to be served, expecting to be seen, and expecting the world to arrange itself around her comfort. She had no idea that the very hotel hosting her family's celebration belonged to the woman she was about to humiliate in front of 200 of the city's most influential guests. She had no idea that her next few sentences, spoken loudly enough for the room to hear, would be the beginning of the end of everything her family had spent 3 generations building. What Diana Sinclair did not know, what none of them knew, was that Claire had a rule she never broke. Every single year, on the night of her hotel's biggest event, she put on the same black uniform her staff wore, stepped onto the floor unannounced, and watched. She watched how her guests treated the people who could not afford to speak back. She watched who said thank you and who did not. She watched who looked her staff in the eye and who looked straight through them as if they were furniture. It was the only way she knew to find out who her hotel truly was, beneath the marble, beneath the chandeliers, beneath the perfect reflection in every polished glass. That night, Claire had already decided the evening would end quietly, the way it always did, with her slipping out a side door before anyone noticed she had ever been there at all. But Diana Sinclair had other plans, plans she did not know she was making, plans that would pull Claire out from the shadows and into the center of a room that was about to learn exactly who had been standing among them the entire time. Somewhere between the champagne toast and the first course, something shifted, something that would not be undone by an apology, a tip, or a quiet word in a hallway. What began as an ordinary night of service was about to become the night an entire family's carefully built image collapsed in front of the very people they had spent years trying to impress. Guests who had come to celebrate the Sinclair family's newest achievement would leave whispering a different name entirely, Claire Bennett, the woman nobody recognized until it was far too late to take anything back. And somewhere in that room, someone else was watching too, someone who had known Claire's secret from the very beginning, and had been waiting all night for exactly this moment to happen. What happens next is the kind of moment people talk about for years afterward, retelling it at dinner tables, arguing over who said what first, disagreeing on every detail except one, that the woman in the black uniform was never who they thought she was. Stay with us, because the next few minutes will show you exactly how a single sentence, spoken in the wrong tone to the wrong woman, can unravel a family's reputation in front of everyone they ever tried to impress. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back nearly 30 years to a 2-lane highway outside a small town in Ohio, where a woman named Rosalind Bennett ran a motel with 11 rooms and a sign that flickered more than it lit. Claire was 7 years old when she learned how to fold a fitted sheet the right way, and 9 when she learned that some guests would tip her mother generously while others would leave the room worse than they found it and never look back. Rosalind never complained. She simply cleaned, restocked, and smiled at every single person who walked through that door, whether they deserved it or not. Claire watched her mother do this for years, and somewhere in that watching, she decided that the way people treated the person cleaning their room said more about them than anything they could ever say about themselves. By the time Claire was 26, her mother's motel had closed, the highway rerouted, the guests gone, and the building sold for less than it once cost to build. Claire took the little money that remained and made a decision most people around her called reckless. She bought a rundown 40-room hotel 2 states away, the kind of property real estate agents apologized for showing her, and she rebuilt it herself, room by room, working the front desk during the day and scrubbing floors at night, because she could not yet afford to pay someone else to do it. 10 years later, that 40-room hotel had become the foundation of a small hospitality group, and 5 years after that, the crown of that group was a 5-star property in the heart of the city, a place called the Kensington Grand. Claire never forgot where she came from, and she built one rule into the culture of her hotel that she refused to compromise on, no matter how much money walked through the front doors. Every employee, from housekeeping to the concierge desk, was to be treated with the same respect as the wealthiest guest in the building. She backed that rule with something most owners never bothered with. Once a year, on the night of her hotel's largest and most important event, she put on the plain black uniform of her own waitstaff, stepped onto the floor without a single person recognizing her, and watched how her guests behaved when they believed no one who mattered was paying attention. It was the only honest audit she trusted. On the other side of the ballroom, that night, stood a very different kind of history. The Sinclair family had been prominent in the city for 3 generations, their name attached to hospitals, universities, and a real estate portfolio that stretched across half the state. Diana Sinclair had married into that name at 24 and had spent the following decades perfecting the art of being seen, of walking into a room and letting everyone else adjust around her. Diana had never once, in all her years of galas and charity dinners, learned the name of a single server who had ever poured her a drink. To Diana, staff were part of the room's decoration, present but invisible, useful but unworthy of a second glance. What made that particular night so important to the Sinclair family was not simply the celebration itself, but the deal quietly attached to it. The Sinclair family was in the final stages of negotiating a long-term partnership with the Kensington Grand's hospitality group, one that would allow them to host every major family and business event at the hotel for the next decade under a favorable contract. Diana did not know that the final decision on that contract rested with one person, and that person was standing 3 feet away from her all evening, refilling glasses and clearing plates, waiting to see exactly how the Sinclair family treated people they believed had no power over them at all. The moment came just after the second course was cleared, when Diana Sinclair reached for a fresh glass of champagne and found the tray a few seconds slower to arrive than she expected. She turned, found Claire standing beside her, and without lowering her voice, told her she was clumsy, unprofessional, and clearly unfit to be working an event of this caliber. Claire apologized quietly, the way she had trained every member of her staff to do, and reached to correct the mistake. It was not enough for Diana. She raised her voice further, loud enough now that nearby tables had turned to watch, and demanded to know who had hired someone so incompetent to work her family's event. Claire remained calm, the same calm she had carried through every difficult moment of her life, from the motel hallway to the boardroom. She offered a second apology and a fresh glass, but Diana was no longer interested in being appeased. She wanted an audience, and she had one now, nearly a dozen guests watching as she told Claire she wanted her removed from the floor immediately, that she did not care who had to make it happen, and that she would be speaking to hotel management personally about a staff member who clearly had no business anywhere near a room full of people like her. The words landed hard, not because they were new to Claire, but because of how many people were listening. For a moment, Claire said nothing at all. She simply looked at Diana Sinclair the way her mother used to look at difficult guests decades earlier, without anger, without fear, only a quiet kind of certainty that unsettled people far more than shouting ever could. Then she set her tray down on the nearest table, straightened her uniform, and asked a passing member of staff to find the hotel's general manager and bring him to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Diana laughed, assuming this was Claire's attempt to fetch someone who would finally have her fired the way she demanded. She had no idea she was about to learn exactly whose hotel she was standing in. Within minutes, word had spread through the ballroom the way it always does at events like this, and whispers passed from table to table faster than any announcement could travel. Guests who had not witnessed the exchange directly were now hearing 3 or 4 different versions of it, each one slightly more dramatic than the last. Some assumed Claire truly was about to be dismissed. Others, closer to the stage, had begun to notice something strange, that the hotel's general manager, a composed man named Thomas Reyes, was approaching Claire not with the posture of someone about to reprimand an employee, but with the posture of someone reporting to his employer. Diana Sinclair, still flushed with the satisfaction of having put an unruly server in her place, turned to her family's table and began recounting the exchange with visible pride, certain the story would end with an apology delivered to her personally within the hour. Her husband, a quieter man who had spent the evening largely in the background, watched the stage with a growing unease he could not quite explain. Something about the way Thomas Reyes was standing beside Claire, deferential and attentive, did not match the story his wife was telling. Around the room, phones had begun to appear, guests recording without fully understanding what they were about to capture, sensing only that something larger than a spilled drink was unfolding in front of them. Thomas Reyes stepped to the small microphone at the edge of the stage, thanked the room for attending, and then said the words that would silence every conversation in that ballroom at once. He explained that before the evening continued, he wanted to properly introduce the person responsible for the hotel they were all standing in, the woman who had personally overseen every detail of its restoration, its staff training, and its reputation as one of the finest properties in the city. He gestured toward Claire, still in her plain black uniform, and said her name and title clearly enough that no one in the room could mistake what he meant. Claire Bennett, owner and founder of the Kensington Grand. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt far longer to everyone seated near the Sinclair table. Diana's laughter died somewhere in her throat, replaced by a slow, dawning recognition of exactly what she had just done and exactly who had heard her do it. 200 guests, many of them business partners, board members, and longtime clients of the Sinclair family, now understood that the woman Diana had spent the last 10 minutes humiliating in public was the very person whose signature would determine whether the Sinclair family's decade-long partnership with the Kensington Grand would move forward at all. Claire did not raise her voice or ask for an apology. She simply thanked Thomas for the introduction, thanked her staff for their work that evening, and told the room, calmly and without a trace of anger, that every person working the floor that night deserved exactly the same respect as every guest seated at their tables, because without them, none of the evening's polish would have been possible. It was a short statement, no more than a minute long, but it landed with a weight that no shouted accusation ever could have. Diana Sinclair sat frozen, aware that every eye at her table, and several tables beyond it, had turned toward her. What most of the room did not yet know was that this was not the first time Claire had encountered someone like Diana. Years earlier, during the difficult stretch when she was still rebuilding her first small hotel, a woman very much like Diana had complained loudly about a young housekeeper, demanding she be fired over a minor mistake, refusing to hear a single word of explanation. Claire had been that housekeeper's manager back then, powerless to stop the firing a corporate office insisted on. She had never forgotten the housekeeper's face as she packed her cart for the last time. That memory, more than any single sentence Diana had said that night, was the reason Claire had built her hotel the way she had. In the days that followed, the story of the gala spread far beyond the ballroom where it happened, shared and reshared by guests who had recorded fragments of the moment on their phones. Diana Sinclair's name became attached to the story in every retelling, and the family that had spent 3 generations building a reputation for influence and generosity now found themselves defined, at least for a while, by 10 minutes of a night they wished they could take back. Many expected Claire to cancel the pending partnership outright, to use her position to end the Sinclair family's association with the Kensington Grand entirely, and for a short time, even her own board believed that was exactly what she intended to do. Instead, Claire did something almost no one anticipated. She reached out to Diana privately, not through lawyers or press statements, but through a simple, handwritten note delivered to her home. She did not ask for a public apology or a grand gesture. She asked only that Diana spend one afternoon shadowing the staff at the Kensington Grand, unannounced, the same way Claire herself had done for years, to see for herself what the work actually required. Diana accepted, reluctant and embarrassed, expecting a punishment disguised as an invitation. What she found instead, over the course of that single afternoon, was a version of humility she had never once been asked to practice in her life. The partnership between the Sinclair family and the Kensington Grand moved forward, but something in the family's relationship with the hotel and with the people who worked there had permanently changed. Diana Sinclair was never again seen treating a member of staff the way she had that night, not because she feared another public reckoning, but because she had finally understood, in a way no lecture could have taught her, that the people serving her had lives, histories, and dignity entirely separate from the role they were paid to perform. Claire never spoke publicly about the incident again, choosing instead to let the story live in the memories of the 200 people who had witnessed it firsthand. So we want to ask you directly, have you ever misjudged someone because of the uniform they were wearing or the job they happened to be doing that day? And did you find out the truth before it was too late or after? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one, and we would love to know if a story like Claire's has ever happened to you or someone you know. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Thanks for watching.